What is up? My name is Melissa Makak, and this is Teach the Teach on the Dice Tower, where I teach you how to teach a board game. And in this video, I'll be covering Twilight Imperium 4th edition. Now, this is a how to teach video, meaning I'm assuming you already know how to play this game, and now you're looking to teach it to other players. There are plenty of ways to teach games. This is just a way that has worked for me and could possibly help you out if you have any sort of difficulties teaching this game in particular, or any sort of games. Now, I will say that for this game in particular, Twilight Imperium, I tend to give homework for this one. I don't usually give homework to players before a teach is about to occur for a game, but for this one, I do share the RTFM video on how to play Twilight Imperium 4th edition. I just think that's a really good video, and I wind up having to teach things anyway because people don't quite remember all of the rules because there's just a lot going on in this game. So I'm there more as like a guide as we play, which helps a lot. However, I have taught this game to players who have not watched any sort of how to play video or anything like that. They don't know how to play this game at all. And so there's a lot going on in the game, and I'm going to try to walk you through it. I will start off with the three main things, the three things that I always start off with, which is the story behind the game, where you are trying to conquer the intergalactic galaxy and become the ruler, supreme ruler, emperor, if you will. The objective behind the game, which is to reach 10 victory points, or 14 if you're crazy, and the way the game ends, which is first person to reach that many victory points wins the game and ends the game. The next thing I go into, so there are 17 different factions that come in the base box of this game. I don't like overwhelming my players. I like giving them the sort of, I guess, quote-unquote beginner factions, if you will, that the rulebook itself kind of states to use for your first game anyway. And I break them up into certain I guess, categories, and I let players know. That way they don't have to really know a whole lot about what's going on the board or anything, and they could still pick depending on the kind of play style they want to go for. So I have like the Sardak Noirs, or Noirs, I don't really know how to pronounce most of these names, to be honest. The Barony of Letnev, and then the Federation of Soul. So I have those three out first, and I say, hey, if you want to go super like aggressive, you want to be like a warmonger, these are the factions that you use in order to do such things. Next up, I go to the like more political side of things. I say these are the more political factions, right? We've got the Emirates of Hakan, so the lions, the cats, and the Shah Kingdom, I'm going to say. These are a little bit more political. I might go a little bit more into like these dudes like to trade goods and things. And these guys actually have some influential power within politics. So there's that. And then last up, I say if you want to go more technology, we're going to want to go to Universities of Jolnar and play this race and do a more tech route and focus on technology. Well, so that's the way I started off, and I think the rest will be better if you meet me down at the table. Okay, so my suggestion for when you're teaching the game is to just play it with 2 other players. So you would have a 3-player game going on. I know this is not the most ideal way to play this particular game. I find 3s to be fine, to be honest, but that's my suggestion. You could have more players if you want. Do as you will. But that's just my suggestion, because I think players will feel a little less overwhelmed just by the amount of people, and I think you will feel less overwhelmed by just teaching the game to less people. But do as you would like, of course. Now, the first thing I have players do is actually set up their faction. So I let them go ahead, turn over their faction boards, and I even say, like, you could read this little story here in terms of background and lore for their character or for their faction. But specifically pointing to this section here, I'm sorry, this is off camera, pointing to this section here in terms of their starting technology and their starting units. And this gets them starting to become familiar with different types of technology that they could have, and then also what each of these units kind of look like in terms of the miniatures and stuff, which is really good. And then also explaining like, okay, and infantry goes on planets, and space ships will go in space on the board and everything. So there's a little bit of that. So now they're actually already starting to learn, and they're starting to kind of feel like they're already beginning to play the game, which is always cool. Then you want to go into, hey, these are the 2 objectives we have out on the field right now. These are public objectives that you could receive 1 victory point for each, and letting them know that you can only complete each objective once. And letting them know also that more objectives are going to come out as the game progresses. But for now, that's what we have, and that's what we're aiming towards. Then you want to go into the phases of the game, letting them know that for right now we have 3 phases, and letting them know it goes into strategy phase, action phase, and then status phase. And then letting them know that at some point there's going to be a new phase added called the agenda phase, but they don't have to worry about that for right now. And then from the strategy phase, now that you've stated that there are these 3 phases, you could speak a little bit about strategy phase, where they just pick one of these cards. Action phase, which is the bulk of the game, where they're going to be actually taking actions and doing things. And then the status phase, where you kind of get to complete objectives and do sort of a reset and upkeep sort of stuff. But I would actually go ahead and just start off beginning to choose your strategy cards, or one of them. Now, I would say that you should be the speaker for the game that you're teaching, and you actually choose first. And I would suggest choosing technology first, and I'll explain why in a bit. And then just having the other players pick whichever strategies they want. Now, what I like doing is showing them the rule book. This is the Learn to Play rule book. Sorry, I just knocked the camera. But Learn to Play rule book. And I like going to this page here because it kind of gives them a little brief synopsis as to what each one does. So while you're taking your technology card, hand it over to the player to the left so they could kind of choose to see what they might want to do, what would be cool, especially based off of the race maybe or rather the faction that they chose. And I think that's really helpful for players. And you just get started from there. You also want to explain to them that in the top right corner, we'll do initiative, and it'll tell you okay, this is when you get to, actually take your turn. And whenever you do take your turn, you should always speak through your turn and what your thought process is, why you're doing the things. That is really helpful for other players. Now, I know I said to pick technology, which makes you go later on during the round, but when it does get to your turn, you could be okay, I'm doing this because of bop, 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 bop. But on other people's turns, you could explain to them okay, these are your choices, and this is what you could do. And I'm going to get into that a little bit later. So the first thing you want to say is that there are 3 different types of actions. Now, I know a lot of times folks will tuck this under the faction sheet because, just to conserve on space, because this game takes up a lot of space. But if you can, I would have at least the new players go ahead and have this out so they could see this. And honestly, I still have it out just so I could see it because I find it helpful. And you go into the 3 types of actions, right? The strategic action, which is something that we'll have to, and you just let them know it's you actually playing your card. And yeah, I mean, this will go, letting them know that this is not something permanent. You'll put this back at the end of the round, so you'll always get a new strategy card. But letting them know that that's part of the strategic action. You'll let them know about the component action where, just saying anything that you have, cards, your faction board, whatever it is that says the word action, you could take that action on your turn. Then you could talk about tactical action, which is the bulk of the game, the biggest part. And from there, I would say the first thing you really want to discuss is activating a system, because that's the crux of the game, is activating a system and letting them know how that works. And I think the biggest thing you want to explain, because I think players can get confused with this part where I'm just placing ships out randomly. But, you know, just saying like, okay, so you've activated this place. This ship could have been here. I'm going to move this down a little. It could have been in this system. This ship could have been in this system. That's another thing, by the way. You want to explain that each of these hexes are called systems, because a lot of cards are going to refer to the term system. But anyway, letting them know that as long as it can come into that space, you could do that. It could come from anywhere into here. You've activated this system. And then also letting them know this is going to stay until the end of the round, with some exception. And once a system is activated, ships and stuff can't move out of it. So the sort of space-locked, land-locked, however you want to say it, locked. From there, you could really start talking about movement restrictions, which is the most exciting part of the game. So you want to talk about all the different anomalies that are out. So like the asteroids, the nebula, the supernova, the gravity rift, and even the wormholes. And you want to point them to their little player aid here, because this tells them pretty much everything they need to know about each of these anomalies, but you want to show them what they actually look like. And once you've actually done that, you can start talking about the different types of planets where, let's see. So when they, let's say, claim a planet or anything like that, you could just tell them that there's different types, right? Like hazardous planets or planets that give you science and things like that, because a lot of cards are going to reference those types of planets. You'll also want to explain how they give you resources and influence. You can explain a little bit about how, like, influence is usually used during like the agenda phase, politics and everything, which you'll get into later. Resources is sort of like a currency in the game. And you want to explain that they come in, once you've like conquered them, you've taken them over, they actually come into your play area exhausted, and you can't use their benefits just yet. Once you've covered that, they're pretty much good to go ahead and take one of their secret objective cards. I know this is supposed to be something that you do at the beginning of the game before anything gets started, really, and you'll let them know that, but they can't really choose anything because they don't know anything about the game. So this is the point where I say, like, go ahead, choose a card, and then explaining, you know, maybe they want to choose something that goes hand in hand with maybe the public objectives, or something that goes with like what their faction is trying to accomplish and things like that. And letting them know that it gives them a victory point when they've completed it. It tells them when they could complete the objective, either like during the status phase or the action phase usually. And also letting them know about the 3 secret objective card limit they have. At this point, I don't really explain combat. I explain it more in depth when it's becoming closer to actually happening during the game. So like if somebody's like next to each other and it's like, it can actually happen, where people could go into combat, then you might want to start to explain a little bit about combat and how you want ships that have a combat level that's a little bit lower, because lower is actually better in this game because you'll be rolling dice and whatever. So they can refer to the ships and everything. But you don't have to really go into actual explanation of the combat until it happens. And with that, you can start to really talk about the faction sheet and what each of these things mean, like the cost of the ship, and going into then like, there's the cost, so you actually need this space dock in order to produce ships and all that jazz. Their movement, their combat level that you already sort of spoke about, and then capacity is a really big one. So explaining how you can't just have these like fighters and infantry going along in space. They need to be carried, and so ships have a capacity. This is also when you should speak about the fleet restriction that they have. You'll also want to talk about commodities and trade goods, and how, again, those are sort of like your resources from planets that you could get, and that's what you'll be using to like buy ships and different things. And even some objectives will need it, like spend 5 trade goods. Now, even though you already, when you were explaining the faction sheet, you might have said something about the fleet restriction, they might have forgotten, because this could be a little bit of an overload here. So I would say after one round of everybody taking one round of actions, explaining the fleet restriction once again, and explaining again how like fighters and infantry do not contribute to that limit. Or you could do it when you see that somebody is about to break the rule. And this is why you want to keep a keen eye on what everybody's doing in their systems to make sure that no rule is broken. Which is also why I suggest playing with just 2 other players, because that could be a lot to manage. Now, after 2 rounds, if no one has done a strategy action, explain that you can't actually pass until you've done your strategy action. You might want to be the one to perform your strategy action just to showcase how it works and how tech works. And this is why I wanted you to pick the technology action, because this lets you control the flow of the game itself and how you're going to explain rules. I think that yes, they have technology out maybe already, but you don't have to explain how it works in terms of upgrading and everything until a little bit later. I would say give it a couple of rounds and then use your strategy card or tile and then start explaining how technology works, how the actual strategy cards work themselves in terms of you getting the primary ability, everybody else being able to possibly getting the secondary ability. And then really as everybody starts playing their strategy cards, that's when you could explain how it works and what they do exactly. Now, some players might be like, oh, maybe I wanted to do this or blah, blah, blah. And you know what? It's the first round of the game. It's a learning game. They could get over it, really. Someone might also just ask, like they know they have, like, let's say leadership or whatever, and they're not entirely sure what something means, and they might just ask you, that's fine, as long as it goes up, go for it, and then just continue to talk about it. And this is then when you could also start to explain about action cards and how they tell you exactly when you can play them, how some of them have the action keyword that you were talking about before, and what it does. So that's something to keep a note. Then also, when someone is getting close to conquering Mecatol Rex over there, or after about 3 rounds, if no one is going for it, just let them know that the agenda phase will happen once it's been conquered. And also explaining to them about the 6 influence, that you need 6 influence to spend 6 influence in order to actually gain control over Mecatol Rex. Once the Mecatol Rex is, taken over and the agenda phase is about to happen, that's when you can actually explain the agenda phase. When the very first time it actually happens, that's when you could actually go through the agenda phase, how that works, influence, all that great stuff. Remind players about the secret objective limit and completion limit, in terms of you can only complete one objective, one public objective during the status phase, and one secret objective, and things like that. And again, you just want to remind them about the 3-card limit with the secret objectives, because that's a rule that you could forget pretty easily. Finally, you'll want to explain an Imperium Rex when beginning stage 2 objectives. So you'll go through your stage 1 objectives. When you flip over the next stage 2 objective, you could say, like, okay, these are a little bit harder to get, but they are worth 2 victory points. And once we've reached, I think it's 5 stage 2 cards, and nobody has won yet, Imperium Rex, we all have lost. We're all terrible. Be ready to answer lots of questions and paying attention to ensure everyone is doing the proper actions. I think that pretty much sums up how to teach Twilight Imperium 4th edition. I will meet you back at my face. So that is how I teach Twilight Imperium 4th edition. I know I didn't go into all the nitty-gritty things like with combat, where really once combat happens, that's when you could go through all of the different steps. I would just wait until it happens. And you could use the player aid and have people like look at the player aid as to what everything means, like in bombardment and all that sort of stuff. I know I also didn't go into, some of the little rules of like, oh, you can't produce when like the other person's like ships or in your space, whatever. You could explain that stuff as it comes up, really, I think. And that would lead to a fine game, because I'm all about If you've watched any of my videos, you know I am all about getting into the game as quickly as possible, having players start playing as quickly as possible. If you have any questions, please leave them down below in the comments. If you have any other ways that you like teaching this game, please leave them down below in the comments. I would love to know. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. This has been Teach the Teach on the Dice Tower. I will catch you next time.